The Draconis Empire stretched across 70 star systems like a net of glittering jewels in the darkness of space. At its center stood Emperor Vreketh, a creature so magnificent that humans could barely look at him without feeling small and insignificant. His species, the Draconis, were like living sculptures made of crystal and starlight. Their scales shimmered in colors that Earth had no names for, and their wings weren't made of flesh and bone but pure energy that let them fly between worlds without ships or suits. They were perfect. Or at least they believed they were. But perfection has no room for mistakes, and on Pyraxis Prime, the Empire's golden capital world, there was a mistake that nobody talked about. Hidden away in the Obsidian Tower, a black spire that rose like a needle into the purple sky, lived Prince Thyron. He was the Emperor's only son, his heir, the future of the entire Empire. And he couldn't walk. He couldn't fly. He could barely move. Thyron had been born wrong. His wings, those beautiful energy structures that should have glowed with power, hung dark and lifeless against his back like broken glass. His legs, thick with muscle that any warrior would envy, refused to obey his commands. They were dead weight attached to a living body. For 20 years he had lived in that tower, hidden from the Empire like a secret shame. The finest doctors in 70 star systems had examined him. They tried genetic surgery, cutting and rewriting his very DNA. They'd attached cybernetic implants that were supposed to make his nerves fire and his muscles move. They'd bathed him in energy treatments that cost more than entire planets. Nothing worked. Nothing changed. The Draconis didn't know what to do with him. In their culture, weakness was unthinkable. A prince who couldn't fly might as well not exist. So Thyron stayed in his tower, alone except for servants who were too afraid to look at him directly. He dragged himself across polished marble floors, his magnificent body betraying him with every movement. His scales scraped against stone. His claws left scratches in floors that had stood perfect for centuries. And every day his bitterness grew deeper, his anger hotter. Then Maya Collins arrived. Earth had fallen to the Draconis 3 years earlier. It wasn't even a fair fight. Humanity's best warships were toys compared to creatures who could fly through the void of space breathing fire hot enough to melt steel. The surrender had been quick. The terms were simple. Humanity would serve, and in exchange Earth wouldn't be burned to ash. They called it a cultural exchange program, but everyone knew the truth. Humans were hostages, scattered across the Empire to make sure Earth stayed quiet and obedient. Maya was one of those hostages. She'd been a physical therapist back in Denver, helping people recover from injuries and teaching them to use their bodies again. That was before the dragons came. Now she was just another human servant, and she'd been assigned to the worst job in the Empire. Everyone knew about Prince Thyron. The servants whispered about him in the halls. The broken prince. The defective heir. The Emperor's shame. Nobody wanted to serve him. Nobody wanted to be near him. But Maya didn't have a choice. When she first walked into his chambers, she saw him immediately. He was massive, easily 15 feet long from nose to tail, covered in scales that shifted between deep blue and silver. He should have been beautiful. He should have been terrifying. Instead, he was dragging himself across the floor like a wounded animal, trying to reach a table on the far side of the room. His claws scraped. His breathing was heavy with effort. And when he saw her standing there, his golden eyes burned with such hatred that Maya actually took a step back. "Another one," Thyron said, his voice like grinding stones. "Come to stare at the freak. Come to pity the crippled prince." Maya didn't answer right away. She just watched him struggle. Watched the way his shoulders moved, the way his leg muscles tensed even though they wouldn't respond. The head physician had already talked to her. A cold, dismissive dragon who'd barely looked at her while explaining that the prince was hopeless. His body was broken beyond repair. Nothing could be done. Her job was just to keep him comfortable and stay out of his way. But Maya had spent 10 years helping humans who'd been told they would never walk again. She'd seen people with shattered spines take their first steps. She'd watched stroke victims relearn how to use their hands. And as she looked at Prince Thyron, she didn't see a hopeless case. She saw atrophied muscles that had never been properly used. She saw a body that hadn't been trained, only examined like a broken machine. The dragons had incredible technology and vast knowledge, but they were missing something fundamental. They were born flying. They were born moving. Their bodies just worked from day one. They'd never had to learn the hard way. They'd never had to build strength from nothing. They didn't have words for rehabilitation or physical therapy because they'd never needed them. They saw Thyron as defective because they couldn't imagine that someone might need to be taught what came naturally to everyone else. Maya took a breath and walked closer to the prince. He watched her with suspicion, his tail twitching like a cat ready to strike. "Your Highness," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "What?" he growled. "Do you want to give up or do you want to fight?" For the first time in years, something changed in Thyron's golden eyes. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something dangerous and desperate and alive. He stared at this small human woman who barely came up to his chest, and for the first time in his life, someone was asking him what he wanted instead of telling him what he couldn't do. "Fight," he whispered. Maya smiled. "Then let's get to work." Maya knew she had to do this carefully. She couldn't just walk up to the Emperor's medical council and demand they listen to her. She was human, barely worth noticing in their eyes. But she also knew that if she did nothing, Thyron would spend the rest of his life dragging himself across cold floors while his bitterness ate him alive from the inside. So she requested a formal audience with the council. It took 3 weeks just to get the appointment. When she finally stood before them in their massive chamber, she felt like an insect facing a panel of gods. 7 of the Empire's greatest physicians stared down at her from elevated platforms. Their scales gleamed under the crystal lights. Their wings hummed with barely contained power. "Physical therapy," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "Rehabilitation exercises. Muscle conditioning. I believe I can help Prince Thyron regain mobility." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then they laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter exactly. It was worse. It was the kind of laugh you give a child who says something adorably stupid. The head physician, an ancient dragon named Kelver, looked at her the way you'd look at a bug trying to explain quantum physics. "Little human," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we have technology that can rebuild entire nervous systems. We can rewrite genetic codes at the molecular level. We can harness the fundamental forces of the universe. And you think rubbing his muscles and making him stretch will accomplish what our science cannot?" Another physician chimed in. "The prince's condition is genetic. His neural pathways are malformed. His cellular structure is fundamentally flawed. This isn't about strength or practice. His body is simply broken." Maya felt her face flush with anger, but she swallowed it down. "With respect, your science has tried fixing him like he's a broken machine. But bodies aren't machines. They adapt. They learn. They can build new pathways if you teach them how." "Dismissed," Kelver said, waving a claw. "Don't waste our time with primitive superstitions." But Maya didn't need their permission. She only needed Thyron's. And that night, in the privacy of his chambers, she laid out her plan. He listened, his golden eyes burning with something between hope and desperation. He'd spent 20 years being told he was hopeless. What did he have to lose? "Let's do it," he said. They started the very next morning. Maya began with the basics, the same techniques she'd used on humans back on Earth. She worked on Thyron's legs first, massaging the massive muscles that existed but had never properly fired. Her hands were tiny against his scales, but she pressed deep, finding the knots and tension points. At first he felt nothing. But slowly sensation began to return to areas that had been numb for years. Then came the stretching. Maya would position his legs and work them through ranges of motion they'd never experienced. Thyron gritted his teeth through the pain. His muscles screamed. His joints cracked. Sweat beaded on his scales, and more than once, he roared in frustration so loud that servants 3 floors down dropped their trays. Maya built a harness out of cargo straps she'd stolen from the loading docks. It took her 4 nights of secret work, stitching and reinforcing until it could support Thyron's massive weight. She rigged it to the ceiling beams and showed him how to use it. The harness took most of his weight but left his legs just enough burden that they had to work, had to engage, had to try. Every single day was agony. Thyron would work until his scales were slick with sweat and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Maya pushed him harder than anyone had ever dared. 5 more seconds, she'd say. "You can do 5 more seconds." And somehow he did. The rage came in waves. Twice Thyron lost control completely. The first time he blasted fire across the room in pure frustration, and Maya's hair singed black on one side. She smelled like burned keratin for days. The second time he lashed out with his tail and nearly crushed her against the wall. She rolled aside just in time, her heart hammering, but when Thyron realized what he'd almost done, the shame in his eyes was worse than any injury. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and Maya heard real fear in his voice. Fear that she'd leave like everyone else. "I'm still here," she said simply. "And tomorrow we work harder." Between exercises, Maya talked. She told him about humans who'd been paralyzed in accidents and learned to walk again through years of therapy. She told him about athletes who'd shattered their bones and rebuilt themselves into champions. She told him about a man named Jake who'd lost both legs in a war and still climbed mountains on prosthetics. She told him about people who refused to accept what the world said was impossible. These stories fascinated Thyron. The Draconis had never encountered such concepts. In their society, genetic perfection was everything. If you were born broken, you stayed broken. The idea that someone could overcome their limitations through sheer determination and hard work was completely foreign to them. They didn't have heroes who'd conquered disability because they'd never allowed disabled people to become heroes. Weeks crawled by. The progress was so slow that some days it felt like nothing was happening at all. But Maya kept records, kept measurements. And the data didn't lie. Then, on a morning 6 weeks into their training, something miraculous happened. Maya had Thyron in his harness, working on standing exercises like they did every day. She'd slowly been reducing the support, making him bear more of his own weight. He was gritting his teeth, trembling with effort when Maya said, "I'm going to release the harness. Just for a second." "Don't," Thyron gasped. "Trust me." She released the buckle. For 10 full seconds, Thyron stood on his own legs. They shook like leaves in a storm. His whole body tensed. But he stood. When his legs finally gave out and the harness caught him, Maya was grinning like a maniac. 10 seconds, she breathed. "You just stood for 10 seconds. The next day he managed 20. The day after that 30. By the end of the week, Thyron could stand unsupported for a full minute. His legs still shook. He still couldn't walk. But he was standing. Something the doctors said was impossible was happening. But every night, Thyron would look at his wings, those dark crystalline structures that refused to glow, and Maya could see the despair creeping back into his eyes. In Draconis society, walking was nothing. Flight was everything. Without his wings he was still worthless. Still broken. Still a shame to the Empire. And Maya knew that standing wouldn't be enough. Somehow they had to make him fly. Maya spent her nights studying everything she could find about Draconis biology. She'd sneak into the tower's library after Thyron fell asleep, exhausted from training, and pull up files on their physiology. Most of it was way over her head, written in technical language that assumed you had 3 decades of advanced education. But she kept reading, kept searching, kept trying to understand why those wings wouldn't work. Then one night, buried in a medical text that was probably older than Earth's space program, she found something interesting. The wings weren't purely biological. They were hybrid structures, part organic tissue and part crystalline technology that drew power directly from Pyraxis Prime's electromagnetic field. Every Draconis was basically born with built-in technology wired into their nervous system. It activated automatically in infancy, as natural as breathing. But Thyron's had never activated. The hardware was there, but the software had never booted up. His neural pathways had never formed the instinctive connections that other dragons developed naturally. It was like he'd been born with legs, but his brain never learned the automatic movements needed to walk. Except walking could be taught consciously. Could flight? Maya stared at the diagrams until her eyes burned. This was beyond anything she'd dealt with before. But the principle was the same as teaching someone to use a prosthetic limb. You had to give them feedback they could understand. You had to make the unconscious conscious. She started raiding the storage rooms where human cargo was kept. Old equipment from Earth, stuff that had been confiscated or abandoned. She found a neural feedback headset, the kind that gamers used to use for immersive experiences. She found bioelectric sensors. She found a portable display unit. None of it was meant to work with Draconis biology, but Maya didn't need it to be perfect. She just needed it to translate. It took her 2 weeks of secret work, soldering circuits by candlelight, writing code on a battered old tablet. She built an interface that could read the electrical signals from Thyron's wing structures and display them as visual data on a screen. Instead of relying on instincts he didn't have, he could see the energy, watch it move, and learn to control it consciously, like flexing a muscle. She was testing the connections when the doors to the chamber exploded open. Guards poured in, followed by court officials, followed by the medical council. And behind them all, towering and terrible, came Emperor Vrekith himself. His scales were deep crimson, almost black, and his wings filled the entire doorway with crackling energy. Maya felt her heart drop into her stomach. What is this abomination? Kelver, the head physician, pointed at the device attached to Thyron's wings. Human technology? You dare contaminate the Imperial air with your primitive machines? Maya opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was going to die. They were going to execute her right here, right now, and Thyron would go back to dragging himself across floors for the rest of his life. It is forbidden to integrate alien technology with Draconis biology, the Emperor said, his voice like an avalanche. "You have violated the most sacred laws of our empire." "Father," Thyron started, but Vrekith cut him off with a gesture. "You will be purged of this contamination immediately. And the human will be." "No." The single word stopped everyone cold. Thyron, still hooked to Maya's harness, was pulling himself up. His legs shook violently. His whole body trembled with effort. But inch by inch he rose. Maya held her breath. The harness was still attached, still taking some of his weight, but his legs were doing most of the work. And then Thyron was standing. Standing on his own two legs in front of his father. For 20 years he'd had to look up at everyone. For 20 years he'd been literally beneath them. But now, shaking and sweating and clearly in pain, he looked Emperor Vrekith directly in the eyes. "I'm not done yet," Thyron said. The Emperor stared at his son. The entire room held its breath. Maya could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. 1 month, Vrekith finally said. "You have 1 month to prove this human's methods work. If you can fly, truly fly, I will reconsider. If you fail." His eyes shifted to Maya. "She dies for giving you false hope. And you return to your tower. Forever." Then he was gone, sweeping out with his entourage behind him. The doors slammed shut. Thyron's legs gave out and the harness caught him. He was breathing hard, scales slick with sweat. Maya was shaking so badly she had to sit down. "Well," Thyron said after a long moment, "I guess we'd better get to work." The training that followed made everything before seem like a warm-up. Maya pushed Thyron for 16 hours every day. They'd start before dawn and work until long after dark. She taught him to think like a human, to break down every movement into tiny conscious steps instead of relying on instinct. She showed him videos she'd saved from Earth, footage of babies learning to walk for the first time, of soldiers with traumatic injuries relearning how to use their bodies, of athletes who'd broken their backs and fought their way back to competition. "Watch this," she'd say, showing him a toddler falling down and getting up over and over again. "See how he doesn't think about it? He just tries. Fails. Tries again. That's what we're doing. Building new pathways. Creating new instincts from scratch." The neural interface worked better than Maya had hoped. Thyron could see the energy in his wings now, watch it flow and pulse. At first it just sat there, dormant and useless. But slowly, with concentration, he learned to make it move. Just a flicker at first. Then a pulse. Then a steady glow. "What comes naturally to others can still be learned," Maya told him on the hardest days when nothing seemed to work and time was running out. "You just have to want it more than they do." And watching Thyron grit his teeth and try again, watching him push through pain that would have broken anyone else, Maya knew he wanted it more than anyone in the entire empire. The month passed like a countdown to execution. Maya barely slept. She'd wake up in the middle of the night with new ideas, new adjustments to make to the interface, new exercises to try. Thyron worked until his body literally couldn't move anymore, until Maya had to force him to rest because pushing further would cause permanent damage. And then, suddenly, it was the final day. The throne room was packed. Every important dragon in the empire had come to witness this. Some were curious. Most were skeptical. A few were openly hostile, their eyes burning with contempt as Maya walked in beside Thyron. She could hear the whispers rippling through the crowd like poison. "The human who thinks she can fix genetics with massage. A waste of the Emperor's time. The poor prince. She's given him false hope." Emperor Vrekith sat on his throne at the far end of the massive hall, his expression carved from stone. The throne room was designed to make visitors feel small, with ceilings that soared hundreds of feet overhead and pillars thick enough to hold up mountains. Maya felt like an ant walking into a cathedral built for giants. Thyron stood beside her. No harness. No support. Just his own two legs. "Ready?" Maya whispered. "No," Thyron said. "But let's do it anyway." They'd practiced this. 1 foot in front of the other. "Don't think too hard. Let the new pathways work." Thyron took his first step and the entire room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. He took another step. His legs shook but they held. Another step. The marble floor echoed with the click of his claws. Maya walked beside him, close enough to catch him if he fell but not touching. This had to be him. All him. Step by step, Thyron crossed the throne room. Dragons on both sides stared with their mouths open. Some had never even seen the prince before. He was supposed to be broken, hidden away, shameful. But here he was, walking like any commoner, like it was nothing special. Except it was everything. When Thyron reached the base of the throne, he stopped. He looked up at his father. And for just a moment, Maya saw something crack in the Emperor's stone face. Pride maybe. Or grief for all the lost years. Or both. But whispers were already starting again. He walks. So what? Any servant can walk. He's still not Draconis. Not truly. Not without flight. Maya's heart sank. She'd known this was coming, but it still hurt. Walking wasn't enough. In Draconis society, if you couldn't fly, you were nothing. All their work, all their pain, all those months of brutal training, and it still wasn't enough. I have something else to show you, Maya said, her voice barely steady. She pulled out a case she'd been carrying and opened it. Inside was her final creation. An exoskeleton made of lightweight human alloys, studded with amplifiers and neural boosters. It looked delicate, almost like jewelry, but it was the most sophisticated piece of technology Maya had ever built. It would take Thyron's weak neural signals to his wings and amplify them 100-fold. Training wheels for a dragon. The court erupted immediately. More human contamination, someone shouted. This is an abomination. Another dragon roared his disapproval so loud the windows rattled. But Emperor Vrekith raised one claw, and silence crashed down like a hammer. Let him try. Maya's hands shook as she attached the exoskeleton to Thyron's wings. It snapped into place with soft clicks, interfacing with his neural implants. Thyron's wings, which had been dark for his entire life, began to glow. Faint at first, then brighter. The crystalline structures hummed with building energy. Come on, Maya said, leading him to the tower's edge. They stood at a massive archway that opened onto nothing but air. 1,000-foot drop straight down to the city below. Wind whipped through the opening, carrying the smell of ozone and distance. Maya's heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. This was it. If Thyron's wings failed, he'd fall. The exoskeleton might save him. Or it might not. Maya, Thyron said quietly, if this doesn't work, it'll work. But if it doesn't, I want you to know. It'll work, Maya said firmly, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. Trust me. Trust yourself. Trust the work we've done. Emperor Vrekith had moved to watch. The entire court pressed forward. Maya could feel hundreds of eyes on them. Her mouth was dry. Her palms were sweating. Everything came down to this single moment. Thyron looked at her one last time. Then he spread his wings, took a breath, and stepped off the edge. He dropped like a stone. The court gasped. Maya's stomach lurched. Thyron fell 10 meters, 20, 30. His wings were glowing but not catching, just trailing behind him like broken flags. Maya heard someone scream. It might have been her. Then, 30 meters down, everything changed. Thyron's wings exploded with light, brilliant and blinding. They caught the air with a sound like thunder. And suddenly he wasn't falling anymore. He was flying. It wasn't graceful. He wobbled and lurched, fighting for control like someone learning to ride a bike. His wings flared unevenly. He dipped and rose in jerky movements. But he was flying. The broken prince, the shameful secret, the heir who was supposed to be impossible, was soaring under his own power. Thyron circled the tower once, twice, gaining confidence with each pass. And the court, stunned into silence, watched as everything they believed about perfection and genetics and impossibility shattered like glass. That night, when Thyron finally landed back on solid ground, exhausted but triumphant, Maya thought they were safe. She thought they'd won. She was wrong. The assassins came in the dark hours before dawn. 3 of them, elite warriors from noble families who believed Thyron's success was a corruption of everything the Draconis stood for. They moved through the tower like shadows, their wings silent, their intent deadly. They wanted Thyron dead and Maya even more so. She was the infection, the human contamination that had poisoned their perfect prince. Maya woke to the sound of breaking glass. She rolled out of bed just as a blade of pure energy sliced through where her head had been a second before. She screamed. The assassin lunged again, but suddenly Thyron was there, crashing through the doorway, his wings blazing with light. He might have been broken his whole life, but he was still the Emperor's son, still trained in combat since childhood. And now, finally, he could move. The fight was brutal and fast. Thyron fought like something wild, protecting Maya with a desperation that bordered on fury. When the guards finally arrived and subdued the assassins, both Maya and Thyron were bleeding, but they were alive. Barely. Emperor Vrekith arrived within the hour. He looked at the assassins, bound and kneeling. He looked at his son, standing protectively in front of the human who'd given him back his life. And Maya saw something shift in the Emperor's ancient eyes. Execute them, Vrekith said simply. Betrayal of the imperial heir is death. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came 3 days later, when the Emperor called a full assembly of the Imperial Court and named Maya Collins the first human to ever hold the title of Imperial Physician. The room erupted in chaos. Dragons roared their disapproval. Some tried to leave in protest. But Vrekith's voice cut through it all like a blade. "This human has accomplished what our greatest minds could not," he said. "She has given my son a future. And if she can do that..." He paused and Maya saw something like pain cross his face. "Then perhaps she can help others we have failed." That's when Maya learned the truth. Thyron wasn't the only one. Across the Empire, hidden in towers and locked rooms and secret facilities, were other Draconis born with defects. Genetic disorders. Injuries that had never healed properly. Conditions that made them less than perfect. The Empire had hidden them all, ashamed, pretending they didn't exist. Some had spent centuries in isolation. It broke Maya's heart. But it also gave her purpose. Within months, she'd established the first interspecies medical program in galactic history. Humans brought everything they'd learned from centuries of dealing with their own fragility. Physical therapy techniques, prosthetic technology, adaptive devices, psychological counseling, the entire philosophy of rehabilitation. Meanwhile, the Draconis contributed their advanced genetic engineering, their energy manipulation, their biotechnology that could regrow organs and repair DNA. Together, they created something neither species could have managed alone. Maya trained teams of human therapists who worked alongside dragon physicians. They developed prosthetics that combined human mechanical engineering with Draconis energy systems. They created rehabilitation centers across a dozen worlds. And they found the hidden ones. Dragons who'd spent lifetimes alone, convinced they were worthless, suddenly had hope. Some learned to walk. Some learned to fly. Some needed permanent assistance, and that was okay too. Because Maya taught them something the Draconis had never understood. Needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you alive. Thyron became the symbol of it all. He could fly without the exoskeleton now, but he chose to wear it anyway. Not because he needed it, but because he refused to be ashamed of the tools that had saved him. He stood before the Imperial Council and argued with a passion that shocked the old nobles. "Strength isn't being born perfect," he said. "Strength is adapting. It's fighting. It's refusing to accept defeat even when every voice tells you you're broken beyond repair." That's what this human taught me. That's what humanity understands. It was a philosophy completely foreign to the Draconis, but slowly, reluctantly, they began to listen. The empire that had conquered Earth through force was being changed from within by one stubborn human woman and a prince who refused to stay broken. 2 years after that first flight, Maya stood on a landing platform watching Thyron prepare to lead a diplomatic mission to Earth. Dozens of dragons were arranged in formation behind him, ready to follow. Not warriors this time. Physicians, teachers, partners. The prince who was meant to be hidden forever was about to become the face of a new relationship between their species. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Emperor Vrekith appeared beside her, silent as a shadow despite his massive size. They stood together watching preparations. "You did what our entire civilization could not," Vrekith said quietly. "You taught us to care for our broken instead of hiding them. To see value in imperfection. To understand that weakness can become strength." Maya smiled, wiping her eyes. "We learned that lesson the hard way, Your Majesty. We've spent our whole history being broken and fragile and dying too easily. We had to figure out how to help each other, how to adapt, how to survive despite our limitations. We had to learn compassion because without it, we wouldn't have made it. And compassion, caring for each other even when it's hard, even when someone needs help forever, that's the most human thing there is." Far above, Thyron took flight, his wings blazing against the purple sky. He performed a barrel roll, showing off, and Maya laughed out loud. The broken prince had learned to fly. And in doing so, he taught an empire of perfect beings what it truly meant to be strong. As the formation disappeared into the clouds, heading toward Earth, Maya thought about how strange the universe was. Humanity had been conquered, made into servants and hostages. But in the end, it was their weakness, their fragility, their long history of overcoming the impossible that became their greatest gift to the stars. The end.